October 19, 1985, 7:42 p.m., Santa Fe, New Mexico. A red Oldsmobile heads north along St. Francis Drive toward the Turquoise Trail, last seen passing the frontage road near mile marker 278. At 9:06 p.m., a front desk timestamp at a roadside motel records a father and his 19-year-old daughter, Ava Mercer. By dawn, they are gone. What happened to Ava Mercer? 16 years later, in Albuquerque, a late-night broadcast will name a familiar license plate and rip open an old wound. The mystery does not sleep, it waits. And when it wakes, it asks for proof. One stray detail refuses to fit. The phone rings in Elaine Mercer's living room before the commercial break ends. She keeps the volume high anyway, as if the anchor's voice might steady her hands. The Sandia Mountains sit dark beyond the window glass, a ragged outline that has watched her count the years. Ruth Barrett folds the Afghan on her knees, then unfolds it again. Mothers learn to do two things at once: listen and brace. "This is Lieutenant Rangel with Albuquerque PD," the caller says, careful with every syllable. "We need you to look at a vehicle found near Los Lunas. The VIN suggests it may belong to your husband." Elaine doesn't answer right away. She looks at the television, at the crawl that announces an upcoming segment about cold cases, about deserts that keep secrets the way oceans keep ships. She lowers the volume. "I'm listening," she says, and hears how flat she sounds. Ruth squeezes her wrist. It is both anchor and signal. Breathe, but move. The drive down I-25 is a corridor of sodium lights and unfinished thoughts. Albuquerque slides off the rear view and the mesas open into night. Ruth keeps her phone in her lap, screen dimmed, a habit she developed after the first year of false leads. People who mean well send maps. They circle arroyos on hand-drawn photos, swear they saw a car with the same color, the same dent. You learn to catalog hope by its weight. At mile marker 196, a southbound freight train keeps pace with them for a minute, a steel companion humming a private song. Elaine watches each yellow cross of the crossings blur. 16 years is a long time to rehearse the worst. Calderon Auto Salvage sits back from the highway, beyond a stand of cottonwoods and a fence dressed with sun-bleached bumpers. Even in the dark, the place has a geometry, heaps in lanes, rows like an alphabet someone once understood. Patrol units splash blue and red across hood after hood. A backhoe sleeps with its arm raised against the sky. Lieutenant Sophia Rangel waits near the gate with a clipboard and eyes that belong to a marathoner at mile 20. Focused, economical, no motion wasted. "Mrs. Mercer, Ms. Barrett," she says, extending a hand that doesn't tremble. "We'll start with identification outside the tape. If at any point you want to step back, say so." Elaine nods and says nothing. Ruth says thank you to no one in particular, the phrase you offer when the world stops and then decides to move again. A tarp sits in the wash of a light tower, pinned at its corners with brake drums. The smell is what Elaine recognizes first: the old leather, the dust, something sweet and stale that belongs to another decade. Rangel lifts one corner for a second, only enough to reveal the right rear quarter. There is the bite of a curb on the wheel lip, the exact crescent Rob swore he would fix after the trip. You can love a person by loving the things they touch. Elaine leans forward to see if her memory is being kind or cruel, then steps back because either answer feels like a betrayal. "Do you need a minute?" Rangel asks. Elaine shakes her head. "No," she says, and hears the old office voice that booked appointments and called insurance. "No, I'm okay." A man in grease-dark coveralls hovers at the edge of the light like a moth that hasn't learned fire is not a friend. "I'm Daniel," he says. "My family runs the yard. The car came in before my shift. It shouldn't have. Everything that comes here is logged. This wasn't." He points toward the office, a cinderblock cube with a window full of sun-faded pennants and a sign promising cash for catalytic converters. Inside, a cork board leans with carburetor gaskets and raffle flyers. On top of a metal filing cabinet sits a blue vinyl clutch bag, small, clean in the way old things sometimes are when they've been handled more than used. Elaine sees it and does not blink. Ava liked blue because blue did not ask for anyone's attention. "We'll inventory the office separately," Rangel says, following Elaine's gaze. Nothing leaves the premises until it's on paper. Who brought the car? Ruth asks, the question built like a step stool, small, sturdy, and meant to reach the shelf no one admits exists. Daniel looks at one of his employees, a woman with a shop rag tucked into her back pocket. Travis, she says quietly. He rolled it in before lunch. Paid cash to a tow. No ticket, no title. Wrangle turns a page on her clipboard. Travis Ellery, she reads. Head technician. The name lands without weight and then finds some. Ruth folds the Afghan again. Elaine watches the tarp breathe with the night wind. She has rehearsed her grief so many times she knows where the walls should be. Now the room feels new and without corners. Wrangle walks them through the next steps in a voice designed to carry both instruction and a measure of mercy. Photograph the visible. Log the marks that time makes and the marks that men make. Confirm the VIN against old paperwork. Confirm the dent against the story. A tow receipt in cash. A missed entry in a ledger. A bag that shouldn't be here, sitting where anyone could see it if they were supposed to see it. On the way back to the gate, someone's radio stutters with static and a dispatcher's calm cadence. Ruth glances at the sky, at Orion coming up crooked over the yard. Elaine keeps her eyes on the fence, on the way the chain links hold shape when pressed. She has learned to love structure. It does not lie. 16 years is distance and it is compression. A calendar and a fist. They will go home tonight changed by an object they were allowed to see for less than a minute. The story will not give itself easily. That is all right. Some truths arrive only after they are carried. Wrangle steps aside to take a phone call, her shoulders tightening just enough to be seen. Elaine looks back at the blue vinyl on the cabinet and thinks of a freshman orientation packet, of a campus map folded the wrong way, of a laugh in a dorm hallway. She presses her palm to her coat where her heart insists on making a case. Somewhere, a detail is waiting its turn to matter. Someone signed this car into silence. Someone will have to sign it out. Lieutenant Sophia Wrangle did not chase ghosts. She audited them. Back at APD, she put the Santa Fe evening of October 19, 1985 under a microscope until it stopped looking like memory and started looking like math. Mileage from St. Francis Drive to the motel matched the last gas receipt in Rob Mercer's wallet, printed at 7:11 p.m. The front desk log time-stamped 9:06 p.m., a room with 2 keys issued, both returned by housekeeping the next afternoon. No outgoing calls from the room phone. No charges in the diner next door after 8:20. A night that should have ended with an alarm clock and coffee had ended with blank ink. Wrangle spread it out across a conference table and drew a simple line. Departure, arrival, silence. Somewhere along it, a hand had pushed. Elaine watched her do it. She brought the thin blue folder she had guarded for years. Photocopies of VIN papers, insurance updates, a DMV change of address that Rob never filed because he never needed to. Ruth sat beside her, fingers folded over the edge of the table, patient as Sunday school and twice as unyielding. We already looked there, Elaine said when Wrangle circled the frontage road by mile marker 278. We will look again, Wrangle answered. The words were not comfort, they were policy. From Calderon Auto Salvage came a clean chain of events with one dirty link. The tow had been logged to a third-party number that died after 2 rings. The driver existed on paper as a man who moved to Texas in 1997 and died there in 1999, which made his signature inconvenient. Cash only. The bill of lading lacked the last 3 digits of the VIN. In most yards that meant a slap on the wrist. In a 16-year disappearance it meant oxygen. Who benefits from moving the car now? Wrangle asked, flipping the page. Who believes its destruction changes what people think they know? Daniel Calderon kept answering by pointing toward his office door. The employee schedule showed Travis Ellery had clocked out at lunch the day the Oldsmobile arrived, then clocked back in 10 minutes before closing to run the baler. The log from the baler said it was idle. Travis arrived for questioning with oil on his cuticles and a story that understood where sympathy lived. A stranger, mid-50s, gray hair, quiet voice. He wanted the red Olds gone. Left the keys and a fat roll of cash. Looked like maybe he couldn't say goodbye, Travis said, glancing at Elaine, then at the floor. I didn't get a name. Rengel noted the phrasing, the careful past tense. She showed him a list of routine intake steps: title check, state form 1002, photo of odometer when possible. He shrugged. Didn't seem important. She asked who had access to the office. He said, just me and Daniel. She asked about the blue vinyl clutch. He said, my daughter's, and watched the room react. How old is your daughter, Mr. Ellery? Rengel asked, the line mild. 7, he said, too quickly. DMV, employer benefits, and county court files would later disagree, but right now there was only the pause in the air when a lie enters and waits to be escorted out. The clutch wasn't nothing. A forensic tech placed it under angled light and found the white tag scorched smooth where letters should live. Heat blisters at the corners. A curl in the seam glue. Someone had made the bag harder to date. A fiber lifted from the lining matched generic cotton twill, unhelpful until paired with a thread on the passenger seat that had embedded in the split vinyl long ago. These were not eureka moments. They were sandbags slowing a current. Elaine watched without moving. Ruth breathed like a metronome, steady, exact. Could that be Ava's? A young officer asked before he could stop himself. Elaine gave the only honest answer available. It could be anyone's, she said and shut her eyes. Rengel pushed outward. She called Santa Fe PD for the old motel audit trail. Spare keys, nightly drawer counts, any guest complaints about noise. She pulled toll records from payphones near St. Francis that night and the next morning and marked 3 calls that lasted under 10 seconds at 6:12, 6:13, and 6:15 a.m. She asked the county about limestone sinkholes on the Pecos side and received a map dotted with places where water ate the world from underneath. She requested Travis's employment file, noting an emergency contact, Michael Ellery, a Belen address off State Highway 47, then wrote the name without reaction. The work had a shape. Shapes become paths. For the audience who follow cases like this, who look twice at a dent or a date and feel an itch when details don't rhyme, this is where the small things begin to matter. In cold files, attention is currency, and the people who keep paying change the rate. If that's you, hold this part. The Oldsmobile's glove box showed a fresh fingerprint where dust should have slept. It didn't match Elaine, Ruth, or Rob. It didn't match Travis either. That night, after statements, Travis walked out to his pickup with his hands inside his jacket pockets, a man wrapped in the posture of a helper. Elaine and Ruth declined an escort home. They wanted their own car, their own silence, their own living room where the television could murmur and the phone could surprise. On the way out, the light tower clipped the edge of the blue vinyl bag and made it look new for a second. Time did what it always does. It tried to blend the wrong year with the right color. Rengel stood by the gate, phone to her ear, listening to a state lab tech whisper results she hadn't expected for another week. A partial from that glove box, the ridge detail crisp enough to ride, had hit on a single, old and inconvenient name. Someone alive had touched what should have stayed dead. Lieutenant Sophia Rengel didn't share the lab hit with anyone until she could test its weight. The partial from the Oldsmobile's glove box matched a 30-year-old fingerprint card tied to a Bernalillo County traffic summons. Michael Ellery. The name was already on Travis's emergency contact. A father's print riding inside a missing man's car 16 years after the disappearance? Credible, but wrong in a way that made the room lean. Rengel called Santa Fe PD to confirm the summons, then mapped the address off State Highway 47 and highlighted it. Later. First came process. First, the office. A night judge signed the narrow warrant for Calderon Auto Salvage. Office, intake log, employee lockers, electronics. Inside the cinderblock cube, air tasted like solvent and stale coffee. A chain of custody team clicked their pens in unison, then got small and careful. The blue vinyl clutch sat on the filing cabinet like a challenge and a dare. Under oblique light, the heat damage on the white tag showed a blistered halo, the vinyl around the seam faintly warped. A technician lifted faint powder off the clasp and swabbed the lining. In the bottom seam, a single, rolled hair lay against the edge like punctuation. It would go into an envelope marked with a time no one would forget. Ruth watched from the doorway, arms folded tight across the afghan she still hadn't let go. Elaine stood with her hands in her coat pockets because the alternative was to reach for the bag and hold it like a person. Wrangel opened a gray locker with Travis's initials scratched into the paint. Inside, 2 shop manuals, a spool of baling wire, a payroll stub, and something that didn't belong, a motel key ring from a Santa Fe motor lodge that had changed names twice since 1985. No room number, just the logo with its sunburst faded to a pale coin. Wrangel added it to evidence and didn't look at Travis until the inventory was complete. "You collect souvenirs?" she asked evenly. "Garage sale," he said, shrugging. "Box of junk." He sounded bored, but his jaw carried the kind of tension that made his words grind. She returned to the point that mattered. "Your father's name appears as your contact. Does he work in the yard?" Travis shook his head. "He's retired. Lives down in Belen. Fixes lawnmowers." "Would he have any reason to handle an Oldsmobile parked in your bay?" "No," Travis said, more quickly than before. "He doesn't come around. Bad back." Every word was a door closed a little too hard. Elaine didn't trust her voice, so she let the quiet ask the next question. Travis filled it. He told the stranger's story again. The gray hair, the cash, the keys, then added a single, uninvited detail that made Ruth's eyes narrow. "He had the kind of mustache that hides a smile," Travis said. It was nothing and too much. No one had asked about a mustache. In grief, you learn the shape of your family down to unphotographed habits, and you learn when that knowledge gets borrowed. Elaine blinked once and looked at Wrangel. The lieutenant's pen stopped moving for a beat. "Describe his glasses," she said, as if that had been the next question all along. Travis rubbed his brow. Clear frames. Maybe smoke. I didn't stare." Wrangel nodded like she was agreeing with him and wrote down that certainty and its speed. They boxed the clutch and sealed the locker contents. Wrangel thanked Daniel for his cooperation and left the door open as they walked out, procedure and signal. Outside, the light tower hummed. Wind moved the tarp in shallow breaths that made the car underneath seem alive. Elaine followed the rise and fall and tried not to think in verbs. She pictured Ava at 19, arguing about curfews and swapping out a campus parking sticker. She pictured Rob measuring a dent with his thumb and promising to fix what could be fixed. Some nights, it feels like the past is waiting in another room for you to knock. Travis lingered by his pickup, body turned toward them, face arranged for contrition. "You ladies need a lift?" he asked, casual as weather. "I'm heading north anyway." Ruth opened her mouth to say no. Elaine got there first. "We have our own car," she said, and kept walking. Wrangel called after them, offering a patrol ride, a courtesy that sounded like a warning. Elaine declined. If the world was going to move again, she wanted to feel the gears. Halfway to the gate, a radio on someone's belt crackled with an update. The hair from the clutch had enough root to try for nuclear. The room's air changed even out here under the open night. Proof is not a shout, it's a drip. Wrangel took a breath she didn't have time for and told her team to lock it down. Then she stepped over to Travis and asked him, gently, why his baler log said idle when a red Oldsmobile had died under its shadow. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Paperwork gets messy," he said. "Night shift." When they finally pulled away, Elaine watched him in the rearview mirror. He wasn't looking at them. He was studying the glow of the office window where the blue vinyl had just disappeared into a box. 2 turns later, they saw Travis's headlights in the mirror again, not catching up, just keeping pace at a distance that felt deliberate. Elaine noticed the brake light before the shutter. A soft red warning blinked, then the pedal sank a shade too far. She eased onto the shoulder beneath a billboard for farm equipment, the night wide and empty around them. Ruth turned in her seat and stared into the rear window. The pickup that had been pacing them slid in behind and idled, headlights low, patient in the way of someone who means to be noticed. Travis stepped out first, lifting a hand as if greeting a neighbor. Jason Cole climbed down on the passenger side, taller, his jacket zipped to the throat. "Trouble?" Travis asked. "I can get you to a garage, or back to the yard, whichever's easier." Elaine kept her voice even. "Nearest police substation is easier." He smiled like the request made perfect sense. "Sure. There's a faster route if we cut across the Saleta Pueblo and come in near the river." Less traffic this hour. Ruth reached for her phone but didn't light the screen. She had a habit of thumb typing in her purse, and she did it now, counting under her breath as if keeping time in a hymn. Elaine locked their car, slid into the middle of the truck's bench seat, and fixed her eyes on the dash. The radio murmured an AM station that faded in and out, baseball scores trapped in old static. Jason watched them in the rearview without moving his head. The shortcut turned off the highway sooner than it should have. Asphalt gave way to packed dirt and the dark took back the ditches. Elaine named landmarks in her mind: Canal Gate, Cottonwood Stand, the low thrum of distant rail, like she was building a breadcrumb trail no one else could see. Jason's hand moved under the seat and came back with something compact and cold-looking, the kind of object that ends arguments without raising a voice. "We'll get you seen," he said, a statement that offered nothing. Elaine felt the change more than she saw it, the air in the cab thickening, the world shrinking to the width of the bench. Ruth's shoulders squared, small and stubborn. She pressed her palm to Elaine's forearm, a pressure code they'd used for years. "I'm still here, don't rush, breathe." Elaine worked her jaw and said nothing because nothing, right now, was safer than the wrong word. They turned again, then again, into a lane that dissolved into two ruts and brush. A low farmhouse came up from the dark like a shape the land forgot to finish. One porch light burned a dull cone over a door chained but not locked. The chain meant more for show than for resistance. A weathered camper squatted off to the side with its blinds closed. Men who live alone long enough stop closing doors all the way. Whoever lived here did not make that mistake. Travis cut the engine. "Just a minute," he said, as if he were about to run in for a jacket. Jason opened Elaine's door and tipped his chin toward the steps. "Phones," he said. Ruth handed over a cheap flip, the decoy she carried because she knew to carry one. Elaine passed a smartphone with its case scuffed from a fall that had never happened. The real phone slept, black and silent, deep in Ruth's coat hem, a burner with 2 numbers preloaded, Elaine's landline and a detective who answered at odd hours. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and newer solvents. Stacks of manuals and parts catalogs lined one wall. A man with gray in his beard and careful eyes sat near a window, his hands wrapped around a mug he didn't drink from. He watched them without hostility and without interest, the look of someone who long ago ran out of places to put his feelings. "Michael," Travis said, as if introducing a family friend. "Keep an eye on our guests. We'll be right back." Jason closed the door softly. The chain slid home. A bolt sank. Elaine tested the room the way she used to test dental instruments before a procedure. Light pressure, listen for scrape. "Mr. Ellery," she said, and the name made him flinch. "Do you know why we're here?" He glanced at the door, then at the window, then at the floor where a knot in the pine looked like an eye. "I know what gets dragged to this house," he said, voice low and even. Ruth lifted her chin. "We're looking for my granddaughter," she said, every syllable and nail set true. "Her name is Ava. 19 when she disappeared. We do not leave without trying every door." Michael's hands tightened around the mug until the ceramic clicked faintly. "They changed her name," he said so quietly Elaine almost missed it. "Samantha, sometimes. Other times something that didn't fit." He swallowed. People can be renamed until they forget who started them. He set the mug down and stood, a decision working through his shoulders. "I can call someone," he said. "But once I do, this place will break open." He used a corridor handset instead of a cell, a landline tucked behind a shelf, the cord taped to look broken. He spoke a cross street and a mile marker and the color of a gate and hung up without putting the receiver all the way back. "Takes time," he said. "Sound travels lazy out here." Elaine stared at him. "Why help us?" He didn't look at her. "Because somebody helped me once and I wasted it," he said. "I'd like to do one thing right on a Tuesday." The door opened before either of them could answer. A larger man stepped in, forearms inked with old shapes, eyes bright and pleased like he'd arrived at a surprise party he'd planned himself. "Evening," he said, the word turning friendly as it left his mouth. "I'm Caleb." He looked at Ruth, then at Elaine, then at Michael, and the room understood that all the names had already been learned. He smiled as if he liked everyone's chances. "Let's not make this loud," he said gently. "Noise brings company." Michael's phone, off its cradle by a half-inch, clicked once in the silence, as if remembering to breathe. Caleb's voice carried the lightness of someone who expects obedience. He nodded to Travis and Jason as if assigning household chores, then looked past them at Michael and found the small rebellion of a phone not quite in its cradle. His smile thinned. "Go check the fence line," he told Jason, tone still pleasant, rhythm still slow. Jason's eyes cut to Elaine and Ruth before he stepped out, the door sighing closed. Travis lingered. He was the kind of man who wanted to be near decisions. Caleb tipped his head toward the kitchen. "You too," he said, and Travis went, hand grazing the frame, a touch that felt like reluctance or superstition. Silence broadened. Outside, wind leaned through the cottonwoods. Inside, the house settled around a choice. Caleb walked to the window and pinched the curtain to look out across the dark field. "People make messes," he said softly, as if speaking to the glass. "I keep them tidy." He turned and met Elaine's eyes, unhurried, curious. "I'm told you're looking for a girl who was 16 years ago," he said. "Girls become women. Memories lag behind." Ruth lifted her chin. "Names can be changed," she said, steady as a plumb line. "Blood doesn't forget." A strobe of distant blue licked the tree line, then vanished. Not close. Not yet. Enough to change the temperature in the room. Michael set the mug down and stepped forward, his body interposing without flourish. "They're leaving," he said. It wasn't a plea. Caleb studied him like a man measuring lumber. Then he smiled again, the expression floating free of any real warmth. "You know the rule," he said. "No decisions for me." He moved his hand toward his belt, not fast, not slow. Elaine felt the old reflex she used in emergencies: count steps, find angles, choose words that keep air moving. "Caleb," she said, making an effort to say the name like it belonged to a person, not to a problem. "If there's someone here who needs a doctor, we can help." He paused a fraction, enough to register that the sentence had been built for him, not at him. The first siren didn't reach them so much as brush the edges of the property, a Doppler smear that could be anything if you needed it to be. Caleb heard it the way men hear the floorboards that tell them who has come down the hall. He let the curtain fall and for the first time, let displeasure land on his face. "You called," he said to Michael, no accusation in the tone, only recognition. Michael lifted both hands, empty, palms forward. "I should have done it years ago," he answered. "But I'm doing it now." A single beat where everyone held the same breath, then Caleb moved fast. He reached the hallway and the camper door banged open outside. Voices, one female, two male, hit the porch in a tangle. Jason reappeared with a hard look and a metal click in his hand that snatched the oxygen out of the room. He was shouting back, before a second figure shouldered past him with the urgency of someone who hadn't had a decision go his way in a long time. The room tilted toward violence and then snapped back, because the front door exploded in splinters and sheriff's deputies filled the space that had been reserved for fear. The sound was huge and then it was just commands, simple and practiced. Hands were shown. Jason's fell open. Travis froze, eyes wide, all his borrowed calm gone. Caleb pivoted toward the back with ghostly calculation and made it 3 steps before a deputy blocked him. He raised his hands and laughed once, a breath with sharp edges. "Clear the trailer," a voice called, and the word trailer broke across Elaine and Ruth like cold water. An officer guided them back, firm but not cruel, and then there she was in the doorway, a woman in her mid-30s, gray sweatshirt too big, hair pulled into something that used to be a braid. She had the posture of someone waiting for instructions that never come. For a moment she looked through the room like it was a bad window. Then her gaze found Elaine's, and the muscles in her face flickered like a shorting light. The kind of shock that doesn't shout stop the house. Elaine said her name once, not the name strangers had been using, but the one that started her, and the woman flinched at the sound like recognition hurts before it helps. A medic eased past with a blanket and the quiet choreography of people who know chaos by its smell. "No major injuries," he murmured to a deputy, "but we'll need psych." He was careful not to point, careful not to turn a person into a diagnosis. Ruth moved 2 steps and stopped because the floor rose under her like a tide. She set her hand on the doorframe to steady the part of her that had waited 16 years and then the part that had to wait another 10 seconds. "You're safe," she said, voice small and formidable. "You're safe now." The woman's eyes filled and refrained. She nodded once like a soldier accepting orders. In the main room, Caleb went biddable, all charm discarded, the spent shell of control. Deputies cuffed Travis and Jason and read words that have ended 1,000 stories and begun 1,000 others. Michael sagged into a chair and held a towel to a weeping line on his arm he hadn't mentioned. Elaine thanked him. He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet," he said, almost an apology. "There's a map they drew once. I can show you where it starts." Ruth turned, puzzled. "Starts," she repeated. Michael's eyes stayed on the floor. "They didn't find that car," he said. "They put it away to come back to." The map had more than one X. They brought Michael to the command post first, wrapped his arm and sat him under a halogen heater while he sketched the thing he owed. He used a deputy's pencil and a map meant for tourists, drawing tick marks where the paper showed overlooks and picnic tables. "Not the pretty spots," he said, tapping blank spaces between lines. "This arroyo. This culvert. This sinkhole they joked about because the sign said, 'Closed to entry,' like that ever stopped anyone." He marked the edge of Pecos Wilderness, then a stand of pinyon that meant nothing unless you knew how long it takes resin to harden in the sun. Rangel copied the marks onto acetate and built teams with calm hands. She didn't talk about the name on the glove box print, or the motel key ring in Travis's locker, or why the blue vinyl clutch had been left where it could be seen. She asked for rope, flagged a helicopter, and told Elaine and Ruth they could ride as far as the trailhead and no farther. At dawn, the mountains wore a thin light that made the ground look honest. Searchers fanned out with slow feet and quiet voices. You respect ground that swallows things. Near a rift in limestone the size of a pickup bed, a tech knelt and brushed away a layer of silt, then another, then found what a decade and a half of runoff could not carry away. A chrome emblem shaved flat, adhesive still clinging, the ghosts of the Oldsmobile letters in negative. They bagged it and kept digging because you don't stop at a piece. In another direction, beneath a juniper that grew sideways in the wind, the metal eye of a trunk latch blinked from the soil. The trunk itself had rusted to lace, the earth owning most of it, but inside, wrapped in anisette-stained newspaper, lay a tie with tiny molar prints. It had been a joke in Rob's office, a silly gift from a hygienist who knew he hated novelty. Elaine pressed both hands to her mouth, then lowered them because this was not the place to collapse. This was a place to witness. Down in the sinkhole, they found bones the way time gives back. Not in order, but together. They did what the living do with the dead. They were careful. They pulled a jaw with a dental implant Rob had argued for in a paper he never got to publish. They found a watch backing welded to a rust bloom where a leather strap used to be. They found gravel where a skull should have kept its shape, and Rangel wrote each item down, the ledger line steady even when the air decided to move. The scene tech took a long breath and looked at her. She nodded once, not to approve but to pin the moment to something. Later, in a lab that smelled like ethanol and old paper, they would confirm what everyone already knew. Not all of Michael's excess held grief. One led to a cinder block shed off an irrigation ditch where deputies pried up plywood and found a cache of license plates, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, stacked like bad ideas, along with blank VIN tags and a stamp kit. Another pointed to a trailer park west of Belen where a storage locker held 3 canvas duffels of cash in small bills, each wrapped with a grocery receipt dated from the years everyone thought the world had simply mislaid Ava. Travis's hands left prints on a bundle. Caleb's prints, already in a federal system under another name, surfaced on a plate frame and on the stamp kit. Jason had wiped well and still missed a corner. In the house, the female officers found a spiral notebook with a list of women's first names and towns. Most were nothing. One matched a missing person from Flagstaff who had come home in 1993 and refused to talk to anyone but her dog. Rangel set that name apart and made a note to call someone gently. The lab had its own slow miracle. The hair from the clutch gave nuclear DNA strong enough to map to Elaine through maternal lineage. Mitochondrial linked again. A later, careful touch pulled a skin cell from the clasp that matched the woman they'd brought out of the trailer. She sat now in a hospital room with a blanket folded like a promise and a therapist who understood when to leave a question alone. When Elaine entered, she didn't speak the old name or the new. She said, "We're here," which is the sentence that stitches people together when labels don't fit. Ruth brought a plastic bin of ordinary things. A soft shirt, socks without elastic bite, a comb, and stood sentry in a chair that squeaked every time she breathed. Caleb accepted arraignment in silence, eyes bright with a private joke. Travis cried like a teenager and said a version of the truth that left his choices dressed as accidents. Jason flinched at loud noises. Michael answered questions he had kept in his chest for 16 years and then asked for a public defender because doing right late is still doing right under a statute book that takes notes. The district attorney shaped the charges like a patient case. Murder on Rob, kidnapping, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and a charge the code reserves for taking a person's years and calling it something else. There would be no show trial, no circus, nothing that asked Samantha to perform her history. Rangel would hold the press line and let the filings speak in nouns and dates. The blue vinyl clutch lay in an evidence box with a new tag. Elaine saw it one last time before it left her hands for good and understood that an object can be both anchor and shackle, and you can choose which. On a winter evening, she drove up to the overlook off the turquoise trail and folded the mountains into a kind of prayer. Grief did not end. It changed its job. It stopped being a guard dog and learned to be a guide. When she came home, Ruth was asleep in her chair and the house was warmer than it had been in years. We learn from stories like this that attention is an act of mercy. The details you refuse to ignore can outlast what people try to bury. Tell someone where you're going. Write down the dent and the mileage. When a person disappears, keep a spot at the table and a copy of the map. Not to live in the past, but to give the future a place to land.